Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into one of the biggest showdowns in history, science versus the establishment. We're going to break down the Galileo affair, a story that's not just about stars and planets, but about power, pride, and the guts to challenge a truth that had stood for 1,400 years.
So how does that even happen? Well, this isn't some simple story of science versus faith. It's way more complicated. It's a drama full of politics, clashing personalities, and one man, Galileo Galilei, whose discoveries with his new telescope threatened to turn the entire universe upside down.
All right, so picture this. It's the early 1600s, and the entire Western world is built on one core belief, geocentrism, the idea that Earth is the center of everything. But there's this new, dangerous idea bubbling up, heliocentrism. This was way more than just an argument between astronomers. It was a collision of two completely different worldviews, and the shockwaves, well, they were about to change everything.
To really get why this was such a huge deal, we first need to step into their shoes and understand the world Galileo was trying to change. It was a universe that was literally built around us. For over 1,400 years, geocentrism wasn't just a theory, it was a fact. It was consensus. It was built on the amazing work of ancient geniuses like Aristotle and the astronomer Ptolemy. And, it just felt right. It's intuitive, right? We don't feel like we're flying through space, but we sure do see the sun move across the sky every single day. And this belief wasn't just pure stubbornness. It was a complete system, woven into philosophy, religion, and just plain common sense. It even lined up with a literal reading of the Bible. But, and this is a really crucial part that gets left out of the simple version of the story, the experts knew it wasn't perfect. To make the math work, astronomers had to add all these complicated patches, like epicycles, which are basically little orbits on top of the main orbits, just to predict where the planets were going to be. The system was showing some serious cracks. So the world was kind of ready for a new explanation, even if it didn't realize it yet. And the tool that was about to shatter that old model was a pretty recent invention that Galileo absolutely perfected for looking up at the sky: the telescope. In his incredible book, The Starry Messenger, Galileo didn't just suggest a new theory, he presented cold, hard, observable facts. He wrote down what he saw with his own two eyes, things that no human being had ever seen before, and things that the old model just could not explain away. He saw that the moon wasn't some perfect, polished sphere. It had mountains and craters, just like Earth. He saw sunspots, which were supposed to be impossible on a flawless sun. But the real smoking guns? He discovered moons orbiting Jupiter, which was undeniable proof that not everything in the cosmos revolved around the Earth. And the phases of Venus? They were mathematically impossible unless Venus was going around the sun. Case closed, right? You can just feel the frustration in this quote from Galileo. He really believed the evidence was rock solid. If people would just look, they'd see the truth. But so many traditional thinkers and churchmen were so committed to the old ways that they literally refused to even look through his telescope. They just dismissed his discoveries as optical illusions. As Galileo's ideas started to gain traction, the debate caught the attention of the church authorities. And suddenly, the stakes became much, much higher. Then, in 1616, the first big blow landed. A group of theologians for the Roman Inquisition looked at this whole sun-centered universe idea and condemned it. They called it heretical because it seemed to contradict the Bible. Galileo was privately warned and ordered to stop holding, teaching, or defending the idea in any way, shape, or form. So for years, Galileo basically kept his head down. But then, an old friend and fan of his, Maffeo Barberini, gets elected as Pope Urban VIII, and Galileo sees his chance. He gets permission from the new pope to write a book discussing both systems. But there were a couple of big conditions. He had to treat them hypothetically, and he had to include the pope's own favorite arguments. This book would become his masterpiece, and also his downfall. See, he wrote it as a conversation between three characters. You've got Salviati, who brilliantly argues for Galileo's side. You've got Segreto, an intelligent, open-minded guy who gets convinced. And then there's Simplicio, the guy who defends the old Earth-centered view. And let's just say the presentation was anything but neutral. Okay, so this is the move that sealed his fate. Galileo took the exact arguments the Pope told him to include, and he put them in the mouth of the character named Simplicio. The problem? In Italian, the name Simplicio can easily be heard as simpleton,
And throughout the entire book, Simplicio is made to look like a fool. His arguments are just completely dismantled. The Pope, his old friend, felt personally mocked and betrayed. Galileo had turned his most powerful supporter into his most powerful enemy. With the Pope now furious and Galileo's enemies seizing their opportunity, things spiraled out of control, fast. Galileo, who was almost 70 years old by now, was summoned to Rome to stand trial before the Holy Inquisition. Now, the trial wasn't really about astronomy anymore. It was about obedience. The big question was, did Galileo, by publishing his dialogue, deliberately disobey that direct order he'd been given back in 1616? The prosecution was convinced he had. Under the threat of torture, Galileo's defense just fell apart. The verdict came back, vehemently suspect of heresy. It was a really serious charge, basically saying they were convinced he believed these heretical ideas, even if he wasn't shouting them from the rooftops. And his sentence was harsh. He had to get on his knees and publicly renounce the idea that the Earth moves. His book was banned, and he was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his natural life. Now, there's this legend that after he recanted, he muttered under his breath, "and yet it moves." We have no real proof he actually said it, but that phrase just perfectly captures the whole conflict, doesn't it? You can force someone to say something, but you can't change the truth. Galileo's trial wasn't an ending. In a lot of ways, it was a beginning. Its verdict has echoed down through the centuries, becoming this powerful symbol in the long, often complicated conversation between science and authority. Because here's the thing, you can silence a man, but you can't silence an idea when the evidence is on its side. Just a few decades later, in 1687, Isaac Newton published his masterpiece. It laid out the laws of motion and universal gravitation, basically providing the physics that mathematically proved the sun-centered model was correct. For science, the case was pretty much closed. But for the institution, well, that took a bit longer. A lot longer. It took more than 200 years for Galileo's book to be taken off the Index of Forbidden Books, and it wasn't until 1992, that's 359 years after the trial, that Pope John Paul II finally, formally, said that the church had made errors in how it handled the whole affair. So in the end, the Galileo affair is rarely as simple as the legend makes it out to be. This wasn't just a clean fight between enlightened science and blind faith. It was a perfect storm of clashing ideas, sure, but also institutional politics, personal friendships, and wounded pride. It leaves us with this complicated legacy about truth, authority, and how we, even today, react when our most fundamental beliefs are challenged by new evidence.